and welcome to the Abundant Self Podcast, a podcast where we talk about everything there is to learn and to know about what it truly means to have life and life in abundance. My name is Sharon Chabai, and thank you so much for tuning in. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time it is that you're tuning in to today's episode. I hope you are well and staying safe wherever it is that you are. If this is your very first time here, my good name is Sharon Chabai, and welcome to the Abundant Self Podcast. Being episode 5 of the podcast, today we are going to be talking about imposter syndrome and just understanding what imposter syndrome is, how to know if you have imposter syndrome, and even how to deal and handle imposter syndrome. Like I said in the previous episode, this has been something, or rather a topic that has been very close and dear to my heart, because it is something that I relate to very well, and I know that I am not the only one. And so that is what we are going to be talking about in today's episode. But before we go there, speaking of the previous episode, we were talking about finding hope when all is hopeless. And the question that we were asking during the episode was, is having hope realistic at all? Now, I decided to take this question to my Instagram, where I just did a Q&A session where I was asking guys, is having hope realistic at all? And I got very good feedback. In fact, some of the responses and some of the feedback that I got, really did well to add value to the episode itself. And just to recap the episode, it was just talking about how, while yes, hope might not be realistic, it is always important for us to find a reason to believe that while things are not looking good or while things are hopeless, there's always a reason to find hope. And being Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month, it was very timely that we had this conversation. So I'm just going to read out some of the responses that we got. And while, of course, we had one person who said that it is not realistic at all. I mean, hope is not realistic at all, which makes a lot of sense. We also had some other people who rather talked about how hope can be realistic and what that means for them. So there's one person who said, of course, hope is realistic. It is why we do most things in life. You hope that the chair you sit on will not suddenly break. And I found that to be a very, very interesting perspective. Another person said, it is realistic. People consider it blind or false optimism when you've not always had to cling onto that little faith that everything will be okay. So only when you are pushed to the wall is when you truly find the need to hope, because when you've hit rock bottom, you have no other option but to look up. And of course, I also found that to be very profound. It is always a pleasure to hear from you. So if you haven't listened to our previous episode, be sure to do so and let us know what you think. In fact, how about you send me a voice message so I can also get to hear your voice? You can find a link to record your voice message on the show notes. So if you have any feedback, anything at all that you'd like to share or add on to that episode, be sure to find that link on the show notes, and I'll be glad to hear from you. So before we get started on the topic of today, allow me to share with you what I have been learning. I felt that it was important to have this segment, where I talk about what I am learning, because like I shared in the very first episode, it is my hope and my desire that through this podcast, you and I will be able to come to a life of abundance. And so, even as I try to empower you and challenge you to think on some of these conversations that we are and of course will be having here on the podcast, it would also be equally nice for you to hear some of the things that I am learning just as well. So this past week, or rather this first 2 weeks, when just after we published the episode on finding hope even in the most hopeless of moments, it is so interesting how I bumped into a study plan on my Bible app that is titled Singing in the Darkness, which basically talks about hope and why it is important to always find a reason to sing in the most darkest of times. So allow me to read a passage that I found so profound even as I decided to take on the study plan. And it says, "Ignoring the darkness does not make it light. Avoiding brokenness does not bring redemption. But singing in the dark can heal us and change us. When our songs are directed toward God, the giver of song and healing, they ultimately bring us hope and joy." I mean, that is so beautiful and profound. And like we said in our previous episode, having hope does not mean ignoring the fact that things are not working out, but finding the courage to believe that things will and do get better. But even as we do this, it is important that we are conscious about where our hope is directed. And this is something that was brought to me this past week when I decided to challenge my Instagram followers with a question on, is finding hope, realistic? Someone DM'd me and, they were talking to me about how sometimes having hope can be unrealistic, especially when you find yourself in a toxic situation, and you stay there and you settle there with the hope that things will get better. So yes, we need to be conscious about where our hope is directed so that we are not settling in wrong and, like I said, hurtful or even toxic situations that are clearly not meant for us, or even in God's will for us, all in the name of being hopeful. And that, my good friend, is something that I am learning each and every day. So on to the topic of today. Like I said, today we are going to be talking about imposter syndrome. And like I started by saying when I was beginning this episode, and even like I mentioned in the previous episode, is that imposter syndrome has been something that I have been thinking about and, thinking through for a very long time. And this happened when I finally realized, when you're going through something and you don't really know what it is you're going through, you really can't put a name to it. You really can't define exactly what it is. But when I finally realized that what I was going through was imposter syndrome, it is something that I started thinking through and even reading more and more about. So in a nutshell, the imposter syndrome is brought about by the internal feeling of not being good enough, of not being worthy, or even competent as others may perceive you to be. So, an individual struggling with imposter syndrome is constantly worried that those around them will eventually realize that they are a fraud and that they do not deserve all their achievements and accomplishments. So the key word there is fraud, always thinking that one day people are going to figure you out and they're going to find out that you are a fraud, that you have been lying to them all along, that you have been deceiving them all along, despite every single achievement, every single accomplishment that you have. So it is associated with feelings of being a phony, of not belonging, and most times these individuals will tend to attribute everything they have achieved to mere luck or deception. I mean, can you believe it? So deception here to mean someone struggling with imposter syndrome might say, maybe I am here because I have succeeded in deceiving the people around me that I am meant to be here. Which, of course, I want to believe is definitely not true. So, sometime last year, I did a blog post on this where I was outlining pretty much everything that I learned and I knew was important for people to learn about imposter syndrome. And even as I was writing this blog post, like I said, it was something that I had been thinking about. It is something that I had been feeling and still do struggle with even till now. And a particular story that I'd like to tell is when I was in high school. I shared a bit about this when I during the first episode rather. And so when I was in high school, I was an outgoing social butterfly, if you'd like to call it that. I mean, I was active in co-curricular activities and leadership, in so many things. I mean, I was in my element, so to speak. So every time we used to have these competitions of solo singing competition where you're required to compose a song and sing it in front of a crowd. We used to have these competitions of composing poems and yes reciting it in front of the school and so many other things. So during this time, of course, I won a lot of accolades. I mean, I look at the certificates that I got from high school and I still do not believe it, because the things that I did when I was in high school, like solo singing competition, like actually writing a song and singing it for everyone to hear. I mean, when I was in campus, I joined praise and worship. I have always loved singing. But right now, imagining that it is my own composition and that I am singing it and people are actually applauding and telling me, wow, that was beautiful, that was a great song, or you have a nice voice, and what have you. I mean, I never used to understand it. In fact, there was a time I remember, it was poetry competition, and it was just the same concept. We were supposed to write a poem and go recite it. So usually what this would mean is that you would represent your house. So I was in Goretti House, and most of the time, I mean, the reason I was even pushed to do this was because of my house, and I wanted my house to shine, So, this fun time. Poetry competition. There I have already written the poem. I already know. These are the number of what are they called? Is it stanzas or what? I I can't even remember what they are called. But I knew this is what I'm going to recite. I remember actually the poem was about peace. I don't know if it was around the period of election. I can't remember. But I decided I was given a theme on peace. And, I wrote a poem and I was now waiting for the D-Day. Now, when the D-Day arrived, when the day arrived for me to go and recite the poem, I didn't go. Well, I did go, but at first, so that morning I got a stomach ache. And of course, the stomach ache was because I was, nervous, I was afraid. But I decided I'm going to exaggerate the pain I'm feeling. I am going to make it seem like, I am in so much pain that I can't, I can't perform. Oh, it is. Hey, so I don't even know how it happened. In my mind, I remember I was in my dorm. I was in my bed and I was just thinking, I can't do this. I honestly cannot do this. I am not good enough. I am going to go up there. I am going to make a whole embarrassment of myself. I am going to become the laughingstock of this school for the rest of the term, for the rest of the year, until I finish my KCSE exams. I just knew, by the way, if this is the day when I am going to lose this popularity or whatever it is that I had when I was in high school, then that was the day it was going to happen. But I imagine I don't even remember how it happened. I just woke up. And by the way, actually this time, I think the pain, well, I had decided to exaggerate the pain, but now the pain got seriously bad. I was in a lot of pain, but I imagine it worked out for my good, because the poem that I had written, it was a very sad poem. It was a poem about making a plea for peace. How it was important for the country to embrace peace, especially looking back at our country, Kenya, where we had post-election violence in the previous years. So when I went up there, the pain that I was in, it sort of like made the whole recital so emotional. People could actually feel the pain and the plight that I was trying to make for peace. And yes, I won. And I mean, every single time I go back and think about it, I still think, how did I even do it? Like, why were guys making a big deal out of it? These people, they must just have been clapping for me because they liked me, because they were my friends. But maybe imagine I didn't even do a good job. Maybe the judges decided to make me win because I was their favorite student, or I was among their favorite students. You get? So those are the kind of things that were going through my mind. Honestly, for a very long time when I was in high school, despite the very many achievements that I got, by the way, I always somehow believed that I was a fraud, and that someone would eventually find out that I was not as talented as I made myself out to be. Because I was always out there. I was always showing up to perform. I was always showing up to take up leadership positions. But that constant feeling that these people have just decided to give me this role because I have deceived them, I have become successful in deceiving them, that I am meant to be here. And honestly, it was scary. Because despite the actual fact that I am talented, that I did deserve every accolade that I got, I felt like I was faking being myself when I was not. Because the truth of the matter is, I did enjoy composing songs and poems. I did enjoy having an outgoing and bold personality, such that I did not fear being in front of people or standing up to take leadership when no one else in the room seemed interested or was not even brave enough. I mean, it was during this time that I, in fact, discovered what my true strengths were, and even had an inkling towards who and what I wanted to become. So despite that inner voice, fortunately, despite that inner voice that was constantly telling me that I can't do it, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not meant to be there, that I'm a fraud, I was able to break through, and I was able to discover, my talents. I was able to discover where I was meant to be. And it even actually inspired the kind of course that I chose to pursue when I went to campus. But even still, sadly enough, that feeling and worry, of not being good enough has never quite left me. It hasn't. Take, for example, starting this podcast. Like I mentioned in the first episode, I took so long to actualize this dream. Simply because I believed somehow, I just told myself, I lied to myself rather, that I couldn't match up to the great podcasters who are already here in Kenya. I mean, when I could even think about the kind of podcasts I was listening to, I was thinking about the podcasters that I was already listening to, who I still do enjoy their shows and everything they talk about in their podcasts. And that, comparing myself to them, comparing myself to what they had achieved, what they have achieved in their own shows, and me, who was just starting out. Honestly, I was just telling myself, are you sure? Are you sure you're really going to hack this thing? Who told you can start a podcast? What makes you think you are a good podcaster? And why? Why do you think you're even good enough to start something like a podcast? So many things are going through my head. And now I was compensating, or rather overcompensating that by over-preparing. Because I want everything to be perfect. I was over-preparing. I was reading books on how to start a podcast. I was listening to podcasts on how to start a podcast. I was talking myself into starting a podcast. And still, I didn't believe that I was good enough. I didn't believe that I could actually do it. But then I did. But get this. Even after I started my podcast, even after I started this podcast, sometimes I don't want to open my stats, like, in analytics at my dashboard to go and see the number of listens that each episode has gotten, because there's a part of me that struggles with the idea that, maybe this is not where I am meant to be. Like every time when was it? It was just the other day. I had released an episode and I was even scared of sharing it, to my networks, because I was feeling, what will these people think of me? I had a lot of doubt, self-doubt, self-criticism, where I am constantly, it's unfortunate, but I have come to realize that I'm the kind of person who is always very hard on myself. Very hard on myself. I always want to be perfect. I always want things to be perfect. And when I go to my dashboard, like the other day, I can't remember which episode it was. I went on there and it was just like 2 days later and it still had 0 plays. And I was telling myself, okay, I think this is proof that I'm a fraud. This is proof that I should not do this anymore. This is proof that I should just wash my hands, quit, and find something else to do. And then, funny enough, the next day I went on and it had 9 plays. And then I was like, oh, okay. So maybe there's something I am doing here, So such like things. And all these things, it really is a lie. When I'm telling myself that I'm not meant to be here, it is a lie, because when I was preparing for this episode, for example, I was seriously looking for something else to do other than just sit down and do my prep. And that is just how much imposter syndrome can paralyze you and can stop you from doing the things that you love. Because in my head, I'm just thinking, oh my days, what if no one listens to this episode? What makes you think that people want to listen to what you're talking about? So I was distracting myself. I was finding things to do. It's a shame my brother was even washing the dishes, because I would have gone and washed the dishes just so that I couldn't sit down and prep. But then I decided, you know what? Let me do it. Let me sit down, prep, and just make it happen. And funny enough, when I did bring myself to do it, I couldn't stop, because I enjoy what I do here on the podcast. Honestly, I could be seated down with my machine, studying and preparing for an episode, and time will just pass by without me noticing. Which reminds me, there was this time I was at the dining table. So we had already had our supper and guys had gone to sleep. Guys had gone to their rooms. And I was left at the dining table and I was just working on my laptop. I think I was editing an episode. No, actually, I had already finished editing the episode. And I was just doing some other, podcast related work. And I could not tell the time. Actually, the only time I realized that I had taken so long seated there at the dining table was when we had a blackout. And that was sometime after midnight, because I was just working on the laptop and then the lights went off. And then I looked up and then I said, oh, stima zimepotea. So then I looked at the time, and it was midnight. It was some time after midnight, and I'm like, oh my days. The house was so quiet. I could even hear people snoring. I could hear my brother, my siblings snoring. People are asleep, and I'm just thinking, how long have I been seated here? So if it wasn't for that blackout, I probably wouldn't even have remembered that I needed to go to sleep. So what am I saying? Imposter syndrome is without a doubt one of the many things that is hindering most of us, if not all, from living a life of abundance. Like for me, if honestly I could have let imposter syndrome stop me when this is something that I actually enjoy doing, it means that I wouldn't even be here today talking to you. I wouldn't even have started this podcast. I wouldn't even have recited that poem that I recited many, many years ago when I was in high school. And I couldn't even gotten the accolades that I got. Think about it this way. Each and every one of us has an innate feeling and desire to live a meaningful life. Deep inside of us, we all want to leave a legacy and hear those sweet, sweet words saying, well done, good and faithful servant. I don't know about you, but when my time here on earth is done, I want to hear God saying those sweet words. Well done, good and faithful servant. And for this to happen, for us to leave a legacy, for us to live a meaningful life, God has placed in each one of us a purpose, or rather a reason for living, something that we must accomplish before our time here on earth is done. And this is something that is always constantly in my mind, because this is also something that we talk about at home. My family and my mom, she's always reminding us that each of us has a purpose, and there's something that God wants us to achieve in this planet, in this beautiful earth. Because like we like to say here on the podcast, none of us was created to eat, sleep, pay bills and die. I don't want to believe that God just placed us on this planet to do such mundane and meaningless things. Yes, each of us have something in us. We all want to have purpose, to know that our lives are worth living. That when we look back, years when we are on our deathbed, that we will not have any regrets at all, because we will have lived a life that matters. However, it's unfortunate that many never discover what this purpose truly is. And we have allowed things like self-doubt to creep into our minds and lie to us that we are not capable or competent enough to go after the things we are truly called to do. I have been battling imposter syndrome for a very long time. And it's something that really never leaves, because you constantly have to remind yourself why you are here. Who am I? Why am I here? What exactly is it that I am meant to be doing here? Because the truth of the matter is, there's always going to be doubt. We are always going to doubt ourselves. Right now with social media, we're always going to be comparing ourselves with others, what others have accomplished, and thinking that we are not good enough, that, certain things have been left for certain people. And is that really true? Is it? Because for me, the mere fact that I am alive today, the mere fact that I am breathing, and that I am speaking to you right now is proof that I am good enough. Leave that alone. The mere fact that you're alive and healthy, that you have breath in your lungs, means you're good enough. Because why else would God create you if you weren't good enough? if there wasn't something that he wanted to achieve through you. And most of the time, the reason we are so chained or held down by such thoughts is because we rely on our own strengths. We rely on our own gifts. We rely on our own talents. Yes, you may be talented. But remember, this talent didn't just come out of nowhere. It came from God. When you're a good orator, for example, when you're good in leading worship, when you're good in an industry like fashion, when you're good in corporate world or whatever it is that God has positioned you, that has not come out of your own strength. But that is what we do as human beings. We tend to rely on our own strengths. We tend to rely on our own abilities, forgetting that all these things have been given to us so that we can achieve the purpose that God has placed in each and every one of us. And when we try to operate minus the source, minus the creator, minus the giver of purpose, minus the giver of talent, and whatever it is that God is putting in us, that is when we find frustration. That is when we start having self-doubt. And, for others, like the other day, my mom was saying how people would always think that they are not talented. That, there are only a certain group of people who are talented. But that is not true. I don't think God put anyone on this earth to just be a bystander, an audience, someone who's just watching other people do life. What about you? What is it that you have that you can offer to the world? I don't think anyone was put here to start saying, me, I'm just here. No one was put on this earth to be a cheerleader, by the way. I don't believe that is true. Yes, it is good to always be there cheering for your friends, cheering for your loved ones, but that is not all you're here to do. You're not here to say that so-and-so is talented, thinking that you yourself do not have the same capability. And that is what we mean by abundance. Knowing and believing in your heart that you have everything that you need to accomplish that which God has put inside of you. So when I was writing about dealing with imposter syndrome, this was the kind of conversation that I was trying to stir up in my readers. And I'd like to challenge and just bring it over to you as well. I remember when I was writing the article, I came across an article that mentioned how numerous achievements don't seem to help, make the imposter syndrome go away. Like me, for example, when every time I think I'm a fraud, even going back to look at those certificates, those awards that I got, it wouldn't really help to take away that feeling, because I'd just be thinking, it was just luck. I got this award out of luck. Even when there's clear evidence that you're actually good enough, that you are deserving of every opportunity or achievement, it's still impossible for you to just understand or even shake off that feeling of being an imposter, or the feeling that everything you have achieved so far has been out of luck. So how can you identify that you have imposter syndrome? Number one is just self-doubt, like I said. Doubting in yourself, being insecure about who you are, about your abilities, and about what you can do. I like to think that sometimes the reason we have self-doubt or insecurity when it comes to such things, it's because we are really scared of the power that we hold within us. That power that we have to change the world, it scares us. And we think that we are not able to share that power with the world, or to have our influence and our voice heard. So self-doubt is one of the things that can help you identify whether you have imposter syndrome. And then constant anxiety is another thing. Always anxious that even if you do decide to take on a project, that you will fail, or that people will discover you, such like things. And then also that idea of attributing achievements to external factors like luck, or that maybe you got favor from whoever it is that was giving you the praise or accolades, whatever it is. So all your achievements are not from the mere fact that you're good enough. They're not from the mere fact that you were competent and, qualified to take on a certain role. I mean, it's just from external factors. You don't want to attribute that to yourself. Lack of confidence, fear of failure are other things. And always wanting to be perfect. When you think about not being good enough, there's always that. Actually, when we think about imposter syndrome, it is actually important that we also discuss it with perfectionism. Because when you're constantly thinking that you're not good enough, it means that you've put a very high standard for yourself, or as a very high and attainable standard that may not even be realistic at all. Like myself, for example, when I was constantly preparing and saying I want my podcast to be perfect, I want everything to be perfect, from the microphone, from the audio editing software, from the guests that I bring, from the way that I speak. I mean, all those many things, they were stopping me. And they were just ways of me trying to compensate the fact that I didn't believe that I had what it takes. The constant, need to be perfect. Comparing yourself to other people. It's easy for us to go onto social media or even seeing what our friends are doing and thinking that you will never be able to get there. That you'll never be able to be a success compared to your friends simply because you're not good enough. We all have that inner voice inside of us that is always saying, good for her. I don't think I can ever achieve even half of what she has achieved. Well, who says you have to? Who says you have to achieve even half? What if you achieve a whole lot than half? Yeah? Because why do we have to let that inner voice stop us from, being who we were truly meant to be? And always thinking that I am a fake waiting to be found out. Is that really true? So all it takes is for you to do a thorough introspection. Of course, I'm not saying that if you have self-doubt, constant anxiety, and all these things, it's not cast on stone that you are struggling with, imposter syndrome, but it just means doing a thorough self-introspection and seeking to find out some of the triggers and the reasons as to why you have these feelings of self-doubt, of anxiety, and, many others. And you can always go ahead and ask for professional help if you want, and, just get started on the journey of self-acceptance and healing. Because sometimes you find that it's not just imposter syndrome. I mean, it's an issue that goes deeper than we can ever possibly imagine. So how do we deal with it? How do we deal with imposter syndrome? Of course, number one is just to accept and acknowledge that it's there. I mean, for me, the very first time I was able to put a name to imposter syndrome, I was not exactly happy, but I was put at rest because finally I knew what the problem was. Finally, I knew my enemy. And then from there on, I was able to now start actively and intentionally pursuing ways of self-acceptance, accepting who I am, my weaknesses, my strengths, so that even in places where I know, well, here I'm not exactly well qualified, what can I do so that I am good enough? Because we cannot always be good at everything. But it is always important to acknowledge the areas where we can improve, the areas where we can become better and improve on ourselves. Now, this one is not going to be easy because it requires you to be vulnerable with yourself and also to be vulnerable with others. And it can be a very daunting experience. But first things first, accept and acknowledge. That is the only way you are going to start the journey of, starting afresh, accepting yourself, praising yourself, acknowledging yourself, not being too hard on yourself. That even when you have, when you achieve something, you're the first one to clap for yourself and tell yourself, well done, Chababai, well done. You've actually done a good job. This was great. All that hard work paid off. All that preparation paid off. Then also go ahead and feel free to also talk to someone about it. I remember there was this time I had applied for a job and I honestly did not expect to be called back for an interview. And that is, of course, because I didn't feel like I was good enough. So I remember I called a friend of mine and I just explained to them, by the way, I don't think these guys will call me back. And it may not have seemed like a big deal or such a big deal at the time, but just sharing these fears and just being affirmed by the person at the end of the line, it made me feel better. So yes, when you're feeling a lot of self-doubt, when you're feeling like you don't feel like you have what it takes, just pick up that phone, set up that coffee date, and share these feelings and emotions. Another thing you can consider is therapy. If you're able to afford it, go ahead and do it. Not everyone is usually comfortable going for therapy, so if you can afford it, there's no problem seeking professional help. As long as it contributes to your whole being as an individual, go for it. It is also very important to remind yourself of your past achievements. Yes, I know we've said that past achievements, they don't do so well in helping to alleviate the feeling of imposter syndrome. But, still go back, look at those certificates, those awards, whatever it is that reminds you of what you have accomplished, and be proud of it. Give yourself a pat on the back, imagine, so that the next time you are picked up for any job opportunity for that matter, instead of asking, why me, ask, why not me? Any time you're asked to get up on stage and speak to people about something, not asking why me. Be confident in yourself. Be confident in your abilities because you deserve it. You deserve every good thing that this world has to offer. So don't let anything, not even that discouraging inner voice, to convince you otherwise. Finally, and most importantly, pray about it as well. I like to believe that we are all connected to a supernatural being. And the Creator, He saw it fit enough for you to be on this planet at such a time as this. Always remind yourself that you are enough. You are deserving. You are worthy of every good gift from above. You have what it takes to be who and what you want to be. We all have a power in us that is higher and above every single thing that affects our lives. It doesn't matter how tiny it may seem. All we have to do is access this power and this belief. Like I said, honestly, I always like to believe that if I am alive in this moment, if I have breath in my lungs, then it's not an oops moment. It's not God didn't just realize that no, she was not supposed to be alive today. If I am alive in this moment, then truly there's something that God wants for me to achieve. And that can only, I don't know what other affirmation you need to remind you that you are good enough. You being alive is proof enough that you are enough. I hope you always remember that one of the things that is hindering us from achieving a life of abundance is imposter syndrome, thinking that we are not enough, thinking that we are frauds waiting to be found out. And that is basically what we have been talking about today. So it is important for, just for us to sit down and just take a step back and try and, figure out what exactly are the things that are maybe hindering me from achieving what has been set before me, my purpose, my vision, whatever it is. And if it's imposter syndrome, then you can always go ahead and take some of the measures that we have spoken about. You can also just go and look through, or rather write down some of the ways in which you can, or some of the things that you can look out for if you want to know whether or not you have imposter syndrome. If you want to learn more about the topic of today, that is dealing with imposter syndrome, be sure to check out Your Bye-Bye's pen. I will leave a link to that particular article on the show notes. Also, if you have no idea what Your Bye-Bye's pen is all about, we have a bonus episode that will help you to understand just that. So be sure to listen in, as well as check out our website to learn this and so much more. I would love to believe that this episode has been meaningful to you. So if you have any thoughts or feedback that you'd like to add, we have a link, like I said, in the show notes where you can record a voice message. And who knows, you might just hear your voice in the next episode. That is, of course, if you want to. So be sure to leave us a voice message. I mean, it would be so glad to hear your voices so that I feel like I have not been talking to myself. Yes, a big thank you to those of you who have already subscribed to the podcast. I appreciate your support and I look forward to the journey ahead of us. If you haven't already, no pressure. We are still glad to have you on board and here with us. Be sure to check out our social media pages and remember that we are currently available on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, and on Pocket Casts. I hope to see and hear you in the next episode where we will be talking about how to be mentally attractive. Until next time, bye-bye. There you have it. This has been the Abundant Self Podcast with me, Sharon Chabai. If this episode has been helpful to you, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We'd also love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or questions relating to today's episode, then go ahead and leave us a voice message on the hotline number in the show notes. Feel free to also rate and review us from wherever you get your podcasts. If you remember nothing else from today's episode, I hope you remember that you have been called to have life and life in abundance, and that I am rooting for you always.